Well, good afternoon and welcome to our June Ranching 101 webinar presented by AgTrust. Today, you will hear from an industry expert who will share how emerging technologies are reshaping cattle operations through smarter management, improved efficiency, and data-driven decision making. But before we start, please join me for a short message from AgTrust.
When your passion is agriculture and a rural way of life, you need a partner who understands. That partner is AgTrust Farm Credit, formed from two trusted farm credit associations. Our mission is to provide personalized financing tailored for full and part-time farmers, ranchers, agribusinesses, and rural homeowners. And because we live in the communities we serve, AgTrust Farm Credit is here to help you succeed.
Well, today we are excited to have Terrell Miller with Cattle Facts join us today as our guest speaker. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the chat box or the Q&A box below, and we'll make sure to get those answered. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Terrell.
Howdy and good afternoon. Glad to be here. This is really always a fun thing to do. I can remember doing these one-on-ones years ago, kind of back in the old school, where you were meeting in the offices and the buildings. So that was always fun. Of course, now we're in the digital age, so that's great. Make sure everybody, I guess a thumbs up if we're able to see my slides. Are we good on that? Thumbs up. All right, perfect. All right, well, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Terrell Miller, and I'm the founder and CEO of CattleMax. I also raise cattle and have been a longtime TSCRA member. My wife and I raise calves down near College Station, so we're Aggie graduates, and actually started our company CattleMax while we were students at A&M. And have been fortunate for the last 27 years to be helping farmers and ranchers make better decisions. So we've seen a lot of evolving technologies over the years, and it's just been, amazing. I mean, we're in such exciting times right now too, with what can be done with technology to make better decisions. And a lot of that better decision making really comes from the record side of things and having a good set of records where you know what you're working with. And so I'm going to go ahead and start and talk a little bit on just a little bit of a foundation on records, just to go for this for a few minutes. This is a one-on-one webinar, so there are some new folks in here, and so this will be a great chance to get everybody up to speed. And for some of y'all that have been ranching a long time, it'll be a great chance to maybe fill in some gaps. So, one of the things I always like to answer very first, right up front, is why keep records? And there are a variety of reasons to keep records. I mean, from understanding which of your cattle are truly productive on one end, to understanding animals for culling on the other end. Really, especially with where we're at in today's market, is knowing which animals really are doing, carrying their weight and doing what they need to. And so really records are a huge part of making sound business decisions. In addition to managing your ranch, the records are also critical, as you know, for tax and accounting. Taxes to keep the government happy, and accounting to keep your CPA happy. And for those of you that do work with many of these great ag lenders, sometimes you'll find the ag lender, they're needing some record information from you showing which animals you have, or how old they are, or what's been your past performance. So records really can help a lot across the board, from internally for management reasons to externally for compliance and lending. And so when we talk about records, it really is making the most out of it, reaping the rewards of good records. And that comes into things like calculating your performance numbers. Weights are a very critical piece of data, as well as pregnancy status. So, when you can capture some of these very basic pieces of data, in the case of weights, you can use the weights to calculate things like your percent dam weight, which is How much of this cow's weight did her calf wean off at? How hard is that cow working? You can also use weights for things like ratioing and indexing. So you can rank your cows at the end of the season when you've weaned your calves, and you want to know, how each cow really perform relative to the others. That's really what can help you with your data there. Also does the same thing for pregnancy status, looking at your overall pregnancy status of your herd, but also looking at how an individual cow is doing in terms of getting pregnant, breeding back, and so forth. There's so many other areas that really won't get too deep into today. Today, we wanted to talk more on the technology, but there are just a lot of different records, from genomic records to identification, breeding, medical, herd health, movement history, that type thing. In addition to getting more out of the data, a lot of that really comes into getting more out as reports. We've worked very closely with the Extension Service here in Texas, as well as other states over the years. And a big thing that the economists really encourage is generating reports. If you're keeping records and you're not doing anything with them, but just keeping them, you've really just made an electronic file cabinet. So when you can take your records and all the data that you're collecting and use that to generate reports, it'll give you ideas of how your herd is doing on a herd level, which is great for comparing this year to last year to the year before. Also, it's helpful for comparing just within the herd. Secondly, you can really use reports to dive deep into an individual animal's performance and look at how this cow has done over time. Has she consistently gotten pregnant? Has she consistently weaned a heavy calf? Has she not really had any health issues? How has she done individually? And so that's really the great thing with records, is you can look at it from a high level, holistic perspective, but also drill down into those individual animals. In addition, we've talked some on accounting reports, for purchases and sales and death loss. And that's a critical thing. And then another area will be, of course, buying history for those of you that are registered breeders. So if you do raise registered cattle, there's a whole other element to record keeping, and that's keeping up with your customers and knowing what they're buying and when they bought and what type of cattle they look for. So there's just a lot of different areas that records can help. And another area, I say customer buying history, that could be on the registered side as well as the commercial. There are different PVP programs, there's different marketing programs that want to know records on the animals that are being consigned. What treatments have they been receiving? If it's a BQA requirements, what are the lot numbers and so forth. So, all right. And this is really what leads into our next area. One thing I should have mentioned in the beginning, and I want to go ahead and mention now before we go to the next screen, is we're going to be covering a lot with the records and then also in the technology. And I highly encourage everybody to use that chat box. There's a little way to ask questions. And go ahead and enter your question as soon as you think of it, because we're going to cover a lot in our roughly 45 minutes before we get to the Q&A, and I don't want anybody to forget questions. So questions are really a big thing I like to work on when I do a presentation, because I don't want to give up, be like the preacher on a Sunday afternoon and give a long sermon. I'd rather talk through things and then folks come up with some questions, because really that's how we all learn, is read the slides, but more importantly, asking questions. Odds are, if you're a producer out there watching this presentation and you have a question, there's probably another producer on this call that that's asking or wondering the same thing. So definitely keep those questions coming, and we'll make sure we get them all answered at the end. So that little side note, I want to jump a little bit more into the detail of the kind of records when we talk about key records. And really the records get broken into different areas. And when you think about records, for those of you that are new producers, don't let this intimidate you. The great thing about ranch record keeping is every little bit helps. And for those of you that are maybe new to ranching or just new to record keeping, in the beginning, keep it really basic. Just focus on the production records, your animal inventories, maybe the date you turn the bull in and you pull the bull. If you happen to be preg checking, record those pregnancy checks. And then, of course, when the cow's calf. Just even starting out that very basic level of, even if it's in the beginning, a basic spreadsheet or a little worksheet of just 5 or 6 pieces of data, 5 or 6 columns in a spreadsheet. That little bit in the beginning is an incredible starting point. And as you get comfortable with the record keeping, you start seeing the benefits. You'll find, it'll be great if we got a set of scales and started weighing our cattle. Or, hey, we have a way that we can do some retained ownership and we can get carcass data back. Record keeping is an evolving process. It's not just a thing you either do or don't do. It's really, the more you get into it and the more value you receive, the more records you'll want to keep. And likewise, if you have data that's not of use to you, that you don't need for managing, your buyers don't worry about collecting the data. Really, it's the Goldilocks effect is what I call it. And that's not too little records, but also not too much records. It's finding that perfect middle ground for you. And then knowing that middle ground is going to move as your ranch becomes more sophisticated, as you evolve and grow as a manager. So talked about the performance records. That's a logical next step beyond production records. Another set of records that's really important to be keeping throughout, though, is the herd health records. And that could be in the beginning just as simple as we worked cattle today and we gave everybody in the herd these 3 treatments. Or as you get further along and you have an animal that's sick, also go in there and make sure you're keeping record of the specific drugs that you gave her for when she was sick. So there's the herd health records that everybody gets, and then there are the individual records that only certain animals get. And so it's important to keep both of those records. Same thing goes for notes and pasture movements. And with a lot of the screwworm stuff going on now, at CattleMax, we've received a lot of questions recently about tracking movements and knowing where an animal was. So really keeping those movements would be a great thing to do. The next area is going to be the financial and tax records. We think of purchases and sales, income and expenses as being the big things. But it's also really important as you work with your CPA to make sure they understand not just how much you sold and how much you bought, but did you sell, raised cattle or purchased cattle or some combination of both? And while your CPA doesn't need to be a part-time ranch manager, they do need to have accurate inventory of your animals, knowing how to treat them accordingly for tax purposes. We'll talk a little bit more about financial and accounting software in a minute, but just know that the financial records it really is a whole different animal from your production, performance, and health records. Then finally, an area of key records would be the seed stock records. So if you're raising registered cattle, you're going to need to keep up with EPDs and pedigrees, and then possibly semen and embryos. So you can see there's a lot of different areas of records. I say they're key. They're key to some people, may not to others. But really, if you leave today after this webinar, I hope everybody comes away understanding at least the benefit of keeping basic production records in a way that you can keep track of it over time. And then hopefully, those of you that are more progressive, management oriented, you'll start to see the performance and health records too. All right. And oops, I jumped forward. Okay. This is a slide, so now we're going to get into the tech part. So I wanted to get this little bit of the basics out of the way on records, and we'll talk about record keeping. And record keeping isn't a new concept. This is a little slide, some illustrations I had a few years ago. And, since the beginning of time, whether it's, the caveman using the stone tablet to track his dinosaurs, the 20th century cowboy using the paper tablet, or the 21st century cowboys and cowgirls using digital tablets. We've always been using tablets since the beginning to keep track of our stock. So notice how the more progressive they are with the records, the healthier and more fuller the animals look too. Sometimes that helps being able to manage them like that. So when we talk about record keeping systems, there's really three main buckets of options out there. There's paper, which is, as you can see, paper is free. You walk around the TSCRA convention every year and you can find more pens and note tablets and that kind of thing. So paper record keeping, the out-of-pocket cost is essentially nothing. But it also has a lot of limitations. As far as if you've ever gotten a piece of paper dropped in the water trough or got mud or other organic material on it, about the backing up, how easily it can be read by others, and also reporting. The next area that we see people looking at in record keeping is spreadsheets. And spreadsheets are sort of the next step in trying to digitally organize records. The thing about a spreadsheet is it's easy to make a copy of it. It's easy to email it to somebody else, that kind of thing. You can copy and paste it around. So it's a great way to essentially electronically store information. Where spreadsheets often start to get outgrowing is when you go from having 5 columns, which spreadsheets are great. If it's tag number, birth date, breed, purchase price, a few things like that, a spreadsheet really, truly is all you need. But when you start getting into more things like tracking a treatment history, let me go create a new tab at the bottom. And then when you want to start recording production history, you end up with multiple columns across the top or more tabs across the bottom. And spreadsheets are great at that 5 to 6 columns, maybe up to 10. But when you start getting into multiple tabs and beyond 10 columns or multiple years worth of data, you really get into what we call spreadsheet spaghetti. And I would bet over a third of our ranchers that come to CattleMax are coming from spreadsheets. And a lot of times they're coming from spreadsheets because they've sort of gotten into this spreadsheet spaghetti of collecting all of this data and it being hard for other people to work with, and formulas and complexity. And they realize that we're spending all this time and money, we're tagging the animals, we're collecting the data in the field, and then we're just not really getting a lot out of it once it's in the spreadsheet. And that's when a lot of times folks will turn to software, and software specifically designed for ranching. And we'll talk a little bit more on that in a minute. But you can see, paper, paper is a tough sell unless you've just got somebody on your team that does not want to work with technology. Spreadsheets do have their place. Like I said, spreadsheets are great if you have just a few columns of data. Spreadsheets are also great for maybe collecting data out in the field and later importing it into software. However, spreadsheets are not a really good persistent, permanent, multi-year record-keeping system. So that's a little bit on kind of your different record-keeping systems. And now what we'll talk a little bit about is going to be really some current trends in herd management, and that's, really gets into the technology, which is why we're all here today. And much of this technology does center around software as opposed to, of course, paper and spreadsheets, which lack these true integration capabilities. And this next part is always fun because I'll put some different vendors out here that we work with, that we're aware of. We're always open to answering questions on any of them because CattleMax has what we call an open to all policy. Doesn't matter whether you're using TrueTest or Gallagher scales, Allflex or Z-tags or something else. We always ensure that our CattleMax works with the equipment that ranchers are using. This was another fun illustration of, talking about the need for technology over time. And, some folks say, well, I don't need software. I don't need digital scales. I don't need EID. I'm not into this technology thing. And, as you think about it that way, talking to the farmer back, in this slide A, telling him about the technology we're using now with tractors is just, it's a huge improvement in efficiency. Same thing comes down to paper. I mean, you can keep your paper records or you can keep your records on a digital tablet. So that's where we'll talk just really briefly, just a slide on what digital records are. And when we talk about digital records, that's software designed specifically for cattle management. Our CattleMax software we're a US based company, and we're the most widely used software in North America. There are other software programs out there from different countries that have come over here. There's also some that are US based. But there are multiple choices out there in software, and just about everybody, including us, offers a free trial. So one of the things we always recommend folks to do is sign up for a free trial, schedule some demos, and really just talk to the team and see what's going to work best for your needs. Sometimes you may not know what your needs are, and that's where you kind of just lay it out on the table, and that's where somebody can help guide you through what your options are. So when we think about digital records, one of the key aspects of digital records is data entry in the field. And the thing about data entry in the field is you have your information there in front of you. You record your data in the field, whether that's on a tablet, a laptop, a scale indicator. And when you get back home, your record keeping should mostly be done because you've already recorded the data back in the field. Another key benefit or aspect of digital records is that they can be accessed anywhere. So anywhere, as long as you have an internet connection, you can sign in and access your records, whether it's at the feed store, at the vet clinic, or out in the field. A great benefit to digital records is you get rid of some of the challenges of sharing. When you have a paper record, you're having to take a photo of it and text it or email it to somebody, and it's a bit clunky. Whereas with digital records, it's much easier for you to share as you choose on your terms with accountants, herd management advisors, veterinarians, and so forth. I know that some of our team, even we all raise cattle on our team, and we've had conversations from time to time about, okay, the vet's coming out to pull blood, or the vet's coming out to preg check, and being able to give the vet a worksheet or have a worksheet for recording data, really makes it easy with those records. And another benefit, really these next two kind of tie together with the benefits of digital records, and that's sharing records with others. Many years ago, the way that record keeping was done, it was either with a piece of paper or a notepad that's on the truck dash, or even somebody sitting down at a desktop computer, and they were the record keeper. Now, as you have the digital records, it's much easier for the owners, managers, employees, spouses. And as you can see here in this picture, this is the wife of one of our team members, and she's working with the daughter and grandkids on record keeping. So when you have the digital records, it's easy to share those records with other people, whether that's giving them just read-only access to look up information they need, or making them a member of the team where they can help with the data entry. Those digital records really will give you a lot of that flexibility. And it's even funny in this picture, these kids that are much older now, and they're now where they're editing records, and this is Jimmy Curtis's family. He's on our team in Jimmy's account, and so his grandson is going, Papa, how come we've not yet bred this cow? She should be due. So I mean, you get all the family involved, and it's really an incredible way of teaching the next generation. So it's a little bit on digital records, and digital records really are the hub of everything else. All the other hardware and software and things can flow into that. One of the other aspects of technology is electronic identification. It still is a piece of technology, even though these EID tags are a bit ubiquitous now. But these electronic ID, most of us know by now, but the white tag in here is about the size of a little bit bigger than a quarter and and maybe a half-inch thick, quarter-inch thick. So it has a number on it, and that number is a globally unique number. So when you have an RFID reader, like in this case, Jimmy has this blue reader in his hand, you can scan that tag, and it sends that tag to software. And that way you can track the animal there. EID has been a great way to more efficiently work cattle, so you're not having to type in ear tags. But EID is also a great way of ensuring traceability and meeting the traceability requirements as you are moving cattle around. In addition, electronic identification, another big area is weights. To me, the two most important pieces of data you can collect is pregnancy status. You've got to make sure cows are getting bred and calving. And then secondly would be weights. Weights are critical to know how your cattle are gaining. Weights are critical for ensuring you're getting the right treatment dosages. If you can eyeball a cow and you're wrong, if she's heavier, then you're under medicating her. If you call her heavier than she actually is, she's lighter, then you're wasting medication by giving her too much. So weights can really help you get that accurate treatment dosage in addition to your gains on that. Weights are that key piece. And one of the great things about the technology now is some weigh scales from TrueTest and Gallagher and some of the others have a way where you can either type in the ear tag or scan the RFID, and that ID goes into the indicator. The weight is captured, and then that weight is linked to the ID. So then at the end of the day, when you're done working cattle, you can just import those weights right into a cattle management software program. And what that's doing is that's saving somebody the time of typing in all of that data. Is it just in literally 30 seconds, you can take weights off the scale and into software. What we found is more people, as they're starting to work more with the weighing, is that the easier you make it on yourself to weigh, the more frequently you weigh. And so, like in our case, we run a backgrounding and preconditioning operation. That helps us weigh our animals and know how we want to segment them off for different groups. In the case of some cow-calf, you're going to want to know how's the bull doing at the beginning and end of the breeding season, that type thing. So weights are always helpful, and when you're weighing on farm, you'll find yourself weighing a lot more often. One of the more exciting areas right now, say exciting in a way of new technologies, it really is in what we're calling smart ranching. And smart ranching is really taking devices, taking hardware, and connecting it to the internet. And in several of the key categories we're seeing right now, one is the water monitoring. If any of y'all have read in the TSCRA or been to the convention, RanchBot is a great company out there that they make water monitoring where you can save the time of getting in your truck and checking water tanks, checking water flow, that type thing. So have hardware that you just install it, plug it in, and it connects up and it can monitor things for you, sending you alerts at certain thresholds. We get into smart fencing from TrueTest and Gallagher, and I'm sure there's others out there. The smart fencing, I have on my phone right now, I have an app that even when I'm away from the ranch, I can see the status of my Energizer. I can turn it off if I need to turn it off. I can also view just the voltage, the history over time. So that's, and if a tree were to fall on my fence, I'm getting an alert instantly that I have a problem, without having to go checking fence, without having to worry about that. So smart fencing is a really cool area that's been coming along. And then another area that's really been taking up a lot of conversation has been the virtual fencing. And I imagine there are webinars, TSCRA, the 101s, just on virtual fencing, and I won't go there today, but that's another big area of technology. But all of this stuff, the fencing, the water monitoring, the virtual fencing does tie back to having good records to go along with it. At this point, I wanted to make sure I allowed plenty of time for questions, and we talked on the basics of record keeping, the types of records, and I wanted to really dig deep into some of the technology while allowing time for questions here at the end. So we'll go ahead and be getting those questions entered in, and we can go from there. I did want to leave my contact info. Our website is cattlemax.com, and you can send it to Howdy. That's how we say hello here in Texas, is Howdy. We also have a weekly newsletter called ranching.com, and ranching.com is a weekly newsletter with management links, like the kinds of things we talked about today. Completely free newsletter. It goes to over 95,000 ranchers each week. And then finally, we're a longtime business partner of TSCRA. If you are interested in CattleMax, we do have a member discount, and we'll be glad to tell you more about that if you contact us. So, all right. I think at this point we're ready to jump into questions. Okay. All right. How are we doing on that? Let's see if I can figure out where the questions are. All right. Let's see. Okay, just a couple questions have come in so far. Let's see. One of the questions was there's some difficulty with the audio. I'm not sure what was going on with the audio, but I think this is being recorded and will be made available. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay, great. Okay. Let's see. And then, one is on what do we need to combat the screwworm? I am far from qualified to give specific advice on that, but in relation to what to do from a record keeping and technology perspective, it's where it's important to really make sure you're keeping track of your animal and your movements. If you're bringing cattle in, if you're purchasing cattle, make sure you know that purchase date and where they came from. If it's cattle, or if you have multiple locations where you keep cattle at multiple places, ensure that you're tracking movements and knowing which date. Okay, on June 13th, we moved these cattle from our Brazos County place to our Burleson County place. So really keeping those movement records. And a lot of software, even like what our CattleMax does, is you can use like a group update feature to where you're not having to go to each animal and make those individual changes, but rather what you're doing is going in and selecting animals and saying these have got moved from here to there, having that date. So specifically on the screwworm, I think that would be the biggest thing, would be to make sure that you're tracking movements as they happen, having those dates. Secondly, if you are putting out any kind of medication or medicated tubs or medicated tags, record those health treatments so you have those in case an event comes up at your place or at your neighbors or nearby, that you have your records to show what you've done. It's a great question.
And I can jump in on that question as well. TSCRA will be hosting weekly Q&As via Zoom on the webinar platform starting this Thursday. So if anyone has any questions regarding New World screwworm and you'd like to ask TSCRA leaders and staffers, please feel free to register for that Zoom. You can find it on our website.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Okay. Another question I see in here, working through the list, is a question about an app versus signing into a website. And one of the things with it, so in the case of our CattleMax, we do have a TagMax app that works with the hardware. We also have a CattleMax app in the works. But really, when you're looking at apps and websites and collecting data, when you look at having your data online, having connectivity ensures that information is updated and recorded in real time. So, I mean, there are various ways of collecting data offline with scale indicators, or we have our TagMax app. Other software companies have other apps offline. But really, the idea is as soon as you get that data collected and you get into coverage, you want it online. That way, other people on the ranch will have access to that information. I'm thinking of a big ranch that we recently worked with out in West Texas, very household name that we would all know. And we were out helping them work cattle one morning. And on the way back to the barn, the main office, which is a 30-minute drive, one of the cowboys had his phone out and was syncing the data. So he had his data synced right then and there. And so before they even got back to the office, they had already had the records taken care of. So, yeah. All right. Okay. Let's see. There's another question about different software and what does the software cost? There's a wide range of softwares out there and a wide range of prices. Some of that's going to depend on how much or how little you want to keep track of. We have our most basic version of our CattleMax for up to 50 commercial head is $8 a month. I mean, so we're talking about less than $100 a year for record keeping. And obviously, software goes up from there. Other software, I mean, they're in that kind of price range. Some are higher, some are lower. But record keeping is not an expensive process. When you look at the price of fuel now, you look at the price of good decisions versus bad decisions. And my gosh, we just bought calves the other day over the weekend, and what we're paying for weaned calves. Software prices have not kept up. They're still pretty low and competitive there. All right. Okay. Let's see. There's another question that came in on using software for tracking other species like horses and vehicle mileage and that type thing. Most of the software you'll find out there designed for cattle, like our CattleMax, it's designed for cattle. I mean, at the end of the day, there's males and there's females and there's offspring. But if somebody's needing to track horses or sheep and goat, there's probably a software out there that is specifically designed for those needs. What we found over the years is there have been like multi-species apps, but it sort of does a little bit of everything, but a lot of bit of nothing. So when you can find that software, if you're managing a cattle operation, you need software designed for a cattle operation. And then if you're horses, you may just want them to ride along with your cattle records, but if you're getting into things like breeding and competition, you're going to want a software specific for that. When you get into things like equipment and mileage, there are different, expense tracking apps out there. Our CattleMax and some of the other software out there do keep track of equipment maintenance and that type thing. So it's really about figuring out just how detailed you need. If it's something as simple as tracking mileage, tracking, part numbers like filter numbers, purchase dates, something like a CattleMax would work good for that. If you want to get really, really deep into it all, there are entire software packages down to tracking equipment. That gets back to the Goldilocks thing that I was talking about earlier, where you're finding, what gets you the right goals of where you're at today. And for a lot of people, keeping the basic equipment maintenance in a CattleMax is good, but there are others that need all kinds of stuff, and they go down to that, something specific for that. And those changes, they'll change over time. You may really just get into equipment and go, I really like this. I just need more data. And that's where your needs will change over time. I have another really good question. I'm glad somebody asked because I was going to bring it up otherwise. And that's how about QuickBooks and accounting software. So CattleMax, as well as pretty well every other cattle management software I've seen in the last 25 years, is specifically for production and performance records, specifically for cattle records. Now, some of the software, like ours, does have a very basic income and expense log But when you're managing a ranch, you really need to be thinking of as you're running a business. And a business cannot truly function without having a good accounting system. And that's having a balance sheet, that's tracking a depreciation schedule, that's being able to run income statements. And so needing the full accounting is something that no cattle software has done. It's really not in any of our wheelhouses, especially when, there's QuickBooks is the, 10,000 pound gorilla or whatever it is, and that it's sort of the accounting system for all businesses. But there are also some great accounting systems designed specifically for agriculture. There's Ambrook, there's Traction, there's Red Wing. There's several of them out there that are designed, more tailored towards ag use. We have talked with all three of those ag-specific companies, and we've been on having an integration where some of the data can flow from CattleMax into these ag packages and back and forth. That's something I would say is a stay tuned for. But regardless, everyone that is in the cattle business needs to have a good accounting system and a good accounting package. So, all right. But another question on how does virtual fencing work? And I'll give a very high level how it works, trying not to get in over my head, but also, want to give those in the room a little bit of a high level. So virtual fencing is essentially the animal is wearing a collar or some type of device around its neck. And that device either has a direct satellite connection or it communicates with another animal that has a satellite uplink or a tower. Different vendors have taken different approaches. And so it's these collars. Essentially, the animal has a collar and it's connected to the internet, to the manufacturer's technology backend. And you can go into their software and draw a map. And you can draw an outline and it will move the animals there from sounds and shocks and all kinds of other, magic algorithms as they can move animals around. And so the virtual fencing is something like the Vents is a very effective package when you get out in the Mountain West where you have really large tracts of land or their own BLM land, because Vents does really good, with its tower and out in wide open spaces. Whereas when you look in, smaller areas, when you're dealing with 50 and 100 acre pastures, something like a no fence or a halter, it has a little bit more precision. And so that's, as you do go down that route, there is a lot of economic questions that you'll want to talk to the vendors about as far as what the setup cost, is there a tower cost, the collar cost, any kind of subscriptions, but you'll find some ideas really quick when you say, okay, I'm on 250 acres in East Texas and my pastures are about 40 acres in size versus I'm on 10,000 acres in West Texas and my pastures are measured in sections. And so those are the kinds of things. So it's a great question on that. Do y'all have a webinar, by the way, on virtual fencing, or have y'all?
Ooh, not that I'm remembering off the top of my head right now, but definitely a webinar that we should consider having.
Sure. It's a very fast moving field, and it's incredible. There was one of the virtual fencing companies has received over $200 million in venture-backed funding. And a lot of that money has come from outside of agriculture. And so there's just a lot of money floating around in that space now. And there's some folks that are really trying to figure out the best way to solve it. I mean, we went from no fences to electric fence, no fences to barbed wire to electric, and now we're back to no fences but virtual.
Exactly.
So, yeah. All right.
It's technology. Yeah. Last call for questions. Just last call.
All right.
And Terrell, thanks so much for joining us today. Do you have any final remarks or any final takeaways for the audience?
Sure. No, I'm glad to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody. I know even though it's 100 degrees and hot in Texas right now, or raining in a lot of places, I appreciate everybody's time today. And I hope you came away with an understanding of just how important records are, and that records aren't just a thing that you have them or you don't, but, records are much more nuanced. What exactly, you're keeping in terms of records. And then the records really unlock incredible decisions through better management. Records also unlock a lot of opportunities with this technology integration. And I guess I'd say the biggest thing really is to think about the Goldilocks. Of in the beginning, just keep some basic records, and as you evolve, know that it's an ever-changing field with new technologies coming on the market each day. And it's not about having technology that's hunting to solve a problem. It's about you identifying a problem you have and seeking the technology to solve it. Yes.
Very nice. Well,
Mhm.
it appears we don't have any more questions. Just a reminder for everyone, if you do think of something tonight or tomorrow, feel free to email education@tscra.org, or we can send it over to Terrell and make sure that we get those questions answered. But we just want to thank everyone who joined us for today's Ranching 101 webinar. We hope everyone has a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you all on July 21st for our next Ranching 101 webinar, Drought Strategies and Water Management.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.